Hello, welcome to the conversation. I'm Mark Thompson here in this self-isolation that we're all imposing upon ourselves. And in between washing hands, I put on my credibility glasses for Chama Sawant, who for 5 minutes took me through how to pronounce her name. She's a magnificent politician in Seattle who is doing things that are truly breakthrough. And when I say that, it is not hyperbole. You're going to hear what she's trying to do, and it's exciting, it's cutting edge, and it represents some deeply held beliefs on her part. So welcome. And how did I do with the name, Shama?
You did really great, and thank you for having me.
All right. Now, we should say, you fly the socialist flag comfortably and proudly, and a lot of things that you're after really reflect that what you'd like to see at a minimum. And again, I'm just summarizing. Please correct me if this isn't more or less the case. You'd like to see these corporations, which get fat or do well because of the many workers there in the Seattle area, for example, but also across America, you'd like to see them pay their fair share of what they're getting out of the system. Isn't that a fair way to kind of describe it in general?
Oh, absolutely. That is what you said is the absolute reality that we're seeing. But as you said, not just in the Seattle area, this is the story of capitalism globally, and the pandemic has really unraveled that story in a way that we couldn't have imagined about the fundamental nature of the system where, millions of people go to work every day and we get shafted because our paychecks don't reflect the value we have produced. And then lo and behold, you have a whole generation of America that is worse off than its parents' generation, while we have more billionaires and multimillionaires. And so these are not unfortunate juxtapositions that coincidentally happened at the same time. It is the wealth being siphoned off from ordinary people and workers that is going into the hands of billionaires, which is why at the bare minimum, you need taxes on big business. And especially in Seattle, this is a very important story because we have the nation's most regressive tax system.
What you're also seeing at the same time, it would seem, is sort of big government, right? People turning to government to bail them out. I'm talking about not only, the people who are living paycheck to paycheck, but huge industries in this country are turning to government to bail them out.
I think that is a very important thing to notice because we're seeing what we had already seen in the Great Recession. We're seeing a repeat of that, but in a much bigger way. Already the Federal Reserve has declared that they're going to pump $1 trillion a day. I mean, this is not a misprint, $1 trillion a day for the biggest banks, the most rapacious corporations who in the Great Recession, it was their system and their practices that took the economy to the precipice of disaster, and they're the ones who got bailed out, while ordinary people, working class people, middle class homeowners, we faced massive unemployment, a wave of foreclosures and evictions, and wages that have never recovered since that crisis. And now we have a bigger crisis on our hands. Kenneth Rogoff, who's a Harvard economist who studies recessions, has predicted that we're heading into what could be the mother of all recessions. And in comparison to what we are heading into, the Great Recession was simply a dry run. And in this context, it is absolutely stunning and just outrageous that these banks that have profited off an ongoing sort of perennial crisis of working people are now also again banging on the doors of the government, as you said, which is funded by middle class and working class taxpayers, saying we want more money. Just to give you a very important local example, the Boeing Corporation, which has extorted the Washington state taxpayers for decades, gotten billions of dollars, used billions of those dollars for stock buybacks for the executives and the major shareholders, once again getting a piece of the stimulus, the so-called federal stimulus package now, and then turning around just 2 days ago, turning around and telling its mechanics that you're no longer going to be paid for the stay-at-home leave, which we need to in order to contain this virus. But the workers are not going to be paid for that leave at the same time that the corporation's executives are getting billions of dollars in loan guarantees and low interest loans from the federal stimulus package.
You would think that and it was talked about as a rider to that package, would be part of that package, that there would be stipulations preventing that.
But yeah, exactly. And that's the thing. I think that's a very important component of this political discussion, because it's not enough for us as a movement to recognize what went wrong or what didn't happen, but it's also critical to analyze why is it that it didn't happen. And unfortunately, I have to say, that's been the story of Seattle as well. The Seattle City Council is 8 Democrats, 1 Socialist, and we see similar things play out. What you see in U.S. Congress, even though you of course, we are contending with the Trump administration and the Republican Party establishment as well. But the fact that the Democratic establishment has not fought in the way it needs to for working people. Why is it that every Democrat in U.S. Congress was not calling for what Bernie Sanders was calling for, which is a $2 trillion package of stimulus for working people only, not for big business, not for the billionaires who have exploited us, but for working people, which would include a $2,000 a month check for all working families. And I would just quote Robert Reich, the former labor secretary, who said, in reference to the one-time $1,200 paycheck check that is going to go from the stimulus package to working families, he said, it's an insult to tell working families, who are going to have no income for who knows how many months. Here you go, you have a one-time check of $1,200. How are they supposed to survive, or for rent, groceries, the needs of their children and their elderly family members? That's an insult. That's why we have to really turn the tables on this conversation and demand far more of our elected representatives than is being demanded of the Democratic establishment. And that's why locally, we are, as socialists and as workers and labor unions, we're fighting for the Amazon tax, which is the tax on the largest corporations in our city, so that we can give immediate cash assistance to many of our hurting families.
So tell me about the Amazon tax. I know you've lobbied for it heavily. You've really been, you pursued this in a way that's been vigorous and passionate. Tell us about what you want.
So, as I said, Seattle and Washington State have the nation's most regressive tax system. And so it's not a surprise that Seattle, it's a beautiful city and it's a deeply unequal city. So at the same time that we have more and more people living on the fringes, barely able to pay their rent, facing a massive housing affordability crisis, and many working class people, especially the Black and brown community, being pushed out of the city because of skyrocketing housing prices. At the same time, we're seeing more and more multimillionaires and billionaires who don't pay anything close to their fair share. This is a corporate and wealthy people's tax haven, by the way. And so, for 3 years now, our movement has been fighting for an Amazon tax, which is a tax on the largest corporations, to fund a massive expansion of social housing and the Green New Deal. Our movement was strong enough in 2018 to win a unanimous vote despite having a hostile city council. As I said, all Democrats except me being a socialist. And those Democrats, less than a month after their own unanimous vote, ended up repealing it because they made a backroom deal with Amazon lobbyists and other, Chamber of Commerce lobbyists. So here we are again. Now things are even worse. The housing affordability is worse. Homelessness is worse. And now you have the pandemic. So what my office is proposing is a tax on the 2% largest corporations. In other words, 98% of small and medium-sized businesses, all other businesses would be exempt. Just the 2% of the largest corporations, like Amazon, would pay a 1.3% tax, which is bare minimum. It's like pocket change for these guys, so that we can immediately fund $200 million worth of coronavirus emergency for up to 100,000 working families who've lost incomes and become destitute in this crisis. And then starting next year, to have $500 million to have, to begin the expansion of social housing and Green New Deal. And one thing I should add is, given the dire unemployment numbers that we are already seeing now and what we're going to see in the rest of the year, this is very important because expansion of social housing and Green New Deal programs implies an expansion of jobs, and the right kind of jobs. We're talking about unionized public sector living wage jobs.
I love that you mentioned that, because I always get this static about the Green New Deal as though it was just some giveaway. But the reality is it's a huge economic opportunity for both the country and for many of the people who need the work desperately.
We have a climate catastrophe at our doorstep. And so how are we going to avert that unless we get dead serious about combating climate change? And that requires actual policy changes, that requires actual changes. But might I say also, just for your listeners, that, first of all, winning these kinds of policies is going to be an absolute struggle. Without a political struggle, without a political clash, we're not going to win this. It is ultimately about tipping the balance of forces in our favor against big business, because they are going to oppose this tooth and nail, and we are already seeing this. But we need to go beyond that. As hard as it will be to win these reforms, at the end of the day, we're seeing what corporations like Amazon are doing. They are exploiting their workforce, they are profiting from the crisis, and they're doing that brazenly and shamelessly, and the they being the billionaires and the multimillionaires. So I think this whole crisis, the pandemic, has brought up the question also of the need for public ownership of corporations like Amazon, the big corporations like Boeing, and repurposing them to produce goods that are of absolute necessity for society. Like, for example, right now, corporations like Boeing and auto sector corporations should be retooled to provide, ventilators and ventilator valves, things that are going to be needed as life-saving devices.
Kshama Sawant, I wish you the best of luck, and I hope you'll visit us again.
Thank you so much. And if I can just take 30 seconds, I think it's really important that working class people push for, prepare for a rent strike on May 1st. And also, I just wanted to say, at the Young Turks, I know that your workers are holding an election for a union today. I wanted to send my solidarity and good wishes to them, and hope everybody votes yes. And please know that my organization, Socialist Alternative, and my office stand in solidarity with everybody at the Young Turks who are unionizing. Let's go forward. Solidarity.
Thanks so much again. It was a pleasure, as I said, talking to you and visiting with you.
The TYT Plus app is now available on iOS and Android. Download to get more TYT content at tyt.com/app.